Good evening, and thank you for joining the New York Jewish Week and UJA-Federation of New York for our monthly Folio literary series. I'm Thea Weisseltier, Director of Public Programs at 70 Faces Media, the parent company of the New York Jewish Week. Tonight, we're honored to welcome author Jenna Weissman Joselit for a conversation with Andrew Silow-Carroll, JTA's editor-at-large. Jenna's new book, Restless Soul, explores the life and times of Rabbi Mordecai Kaplan, one of the architects of modern Judaism. With all the challenges of the moment we are in, I know that Jenna will provide us some important and valuable insights from a seminal and pioneering leader of American Judaism. Our partner, UJA-Federation of New York, knows the value of Jewish community. They know there's no one way to lead a Jewish life or participate in such a diverse Jewish community. That's why their support offers many opportunities for people to find the path that matches their interests and needs, ensuring that our way of life and our right to be proudly Jewish without fear or intimidation in our home communities, on college campuses, and beyond is non-negotiable. To learn more about UJA's work, please visit their website. The link is in the chat. With that, we turn to Jenna and Andy to start our program. Thank you.
Okay, good evening and welcome to all our viewers. It is my honor to be introducing and talking and moderating this discussion with Jenna Weissman Joselit. I should say this before I formally introduce you, Jenna, is that years ago when I worked at the Forward, not that many years ago, but a few years ago when I worked at the Forward, you came on as a columnist writing your The Wonders of America about Americans,
Jewish
American
culture,
Jewish
Jewish
culture,
life, yeah.
Jewish life, everything. This I always called it about stuff, not
Right.
necessarily about theology, but about the things that make us Jewish. And I think that when I heard you were writing a biography of Mordecai Kaplan, that made sense to me because famously he was interested in Judaism as a civilization. So we're going to talk about that. But first, I'll say that Jen is the Charles E. Smith Professor of Judaic Studies and History at the George Washington University. Her books include The Wonders of America, Reinventing Jewish Culture, 1880 to 1950, Set in Stone, America's Embrace of the Ten Commandments, and Our Gang, Jewish Crime and the New York Jewish Community. All of those, some of my favorite topics. So Jenna, welcome.
Thank
I'm
you.
going to dive right in and talk about Mordecai M. Kaplan.
Okay. Before we do, I just want to acknowledge to your audiences, I think they'll really get a kick out of knowing that with tonight's discussion, we come full circle because it was many moons ago, Andy, that you launched me on a brand new trajectory, that of becoming a monthly columnist, first for the Forward and then for Tablet, and these days as a contributing writer for the Jewish Review of Books. And now here I am as a biographer, which is also a brand new hat that I wear. So thank you so much for your support and interest, and thank Thea for the opportunity to talk to your audience.
Oh, that is great to hear. So, you know what I want to do? I'd like to start, if possible, at the end, which is let's just remind people he lived a very long life, but
Yeah.
Kaplan has been passed away a number of years ago. How is he remembered? And maybe we can talk about the book he wrote, the books he wrote,
Whoops,
the
right.
institutions he founded, and, on one foot, who was Mordecai M. Kaplan?
I don't know, really. I spent a lot of time in his company. He was a protean figure who, as you say, wrote a lot of books, whales of books. They were enormously sized books, perhaps the most famous of which is Judaism as a Civilization, which dates to 1934 and is still read. How many years later? It's almost a century later. He built the SAJ, the Society for the Advancement of Judaism. He created a new way of thinking about being Jewish, which ultimately, and though much to his distress, became a denomination rather than just a way of thinking. 11, a catalyst that was known and continues to be known as Reconstructionism. And he was a founder of the Jewish Center, and with it an entirely new way of thinking about Jewish communal life and the role of the synagogue and the role of religion. So kind of anticipating your next question, I think in so many ways, even though it's not acknowledged as such, Kaplan's ideas about what it means to be a modern American Jew is part and parcel of our cultural DNA today.
Mm-hmm. So just to set him in time, he's born in Galicia, I believe.
Vilna, Lithuania. He's very Litvish in that respect.
Mm-hmm.
He born in 1881. He comes to the States when he's 8 years old, so 1889. Lives on the Lower East Side for a brief spell. And then way before his bar mitzvah, he enrolls in the Jewish Theological Seminary. So I have a sense that he's kind of a prodigy, somebody who's very at home in Jewish sources, equally at home in America, and at a very tender age is thinking about ways to serve the Jewish community. So his family moves uptown. JTS was located in the 50s. They move uptown to be near him. And then somewhere along the line, he goes to the Upper East Side, where he's the first English-speaking rabbi of Congregation Kehileth Jeshurun, otherwise known as KJ. And then he moves across the park to the Upper West Side, where he'll spend the balance of his life, with the exception of extended jaunts to Israel in the 70s and 80s. And he comes back to the States essentially to die when he's about 100. And he dies in 1983 at the age of 102.
So JTS is, of course, the Jewish Theological Seminary. It's the flagship of conservative Judaism. Maybe it's helpful here to talk about what is American Judaism when he's coming of age, and he's really going to react against it for much of his career. So what is American Judaism like, and what was dissatisfying about it to someone like Kaplan?
I think everything about it was dissatisfying. I think he thought it was predicated on kind of an emotional basis and not very culturally literate. It was based on responsibility and obligation, but not a thorough interrogation of what it was all about. It just seemed thin to him. And here and very old worldly. And here he is in America. He's very much a product of America. And he wants to create something that is beautifully aligned with American values of democracy and pluralism and expansiveness and joy and laughter. As you know, and as some of your audience members might know, he kept a diary, which is also very interesting. He kept a diary for most of his life in which he very avidly records what he's feeling, what he's seeing. And so it's a roadmap to American Jewry of the 20th century. And it's very clear from the get-go that he sees things that most of us, if we were living back in the day, wouldn't have seen, and very keenly aware of the need to make Jewishness over, not to throw it out and not just to hold on and not just to remain steadfast and true, but to infuse it with a new kind of spirit, a spirit of intellection and inquiry and pride and zest and joy. There's a line in somewhere along the lines where he's building the Jewish Center, which still stands on West 86th Street. And unusually, it's a vertical building, just like the beautiful apartment houses that surround it. It's not horizontal, and it has all sorts of amenities. And one of the things he says is that he wants little kids to gamble, Gambol, such a funny word in the context of Jewishness, but he wants them to gamble their way into Judaism. And he feels that Judaism doesn't allow us to laugh enough. And so he wants to infuse it with fun. He doesn't use that word fun, but it suffuses everything that he's thinking about as he's creating the Jewish Center. So that's kind of novel. At the same time that he's infusing it with bonhomie and fun and activity and sociability, he's not throwing stuff out either. He's trying to just infuse it, augment, enhance. And as I discovered after I wrote the book, a wonderful quote from him where he talks about trying to find the exhilaration in being Jewish, which I think is as timely today as it was back in 1927 when he said it, that Jewishness isn't simply a responsibility or a burden, that there's something fulfilling about it. Yeah. That there's something expansive about it. And that's what he's trying to do. Doesn't always succeed. But I think that's the engine that drives Kaplan's train, at least initially.
So I think this is probably a mistake, especially in talking about Kaplan, but we tend to think in denominational terms.
Yeah.
Orthodox, Reformed, Conservative,
Right.
the joke, crazy, hazy, and lazy, right? He kind of, KJ, he's an Orthodox rabbi, but by the time he founds SAJ, which is another synagogue, the Society for the Advancement of Judaism, he's less so or different.
He's different. Can I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think he abhors denominationalism. For one
Right.
thing, he sees it as a Christian construct. For another, he sees it as erecting boundaries. And for him, the main impetus for modern Jewish life is unity, and for people to understand one another across all sorts of divides, and to opening up the possibilities. You didn't have to be Orthodox to be able to want to attend a traditional shul, or to observe Shabbat in your way, or to have a full-throttled Seder. He wanted all of these opportunities to be accessible to everyone. And it troubled him enormously that people were defining themselves in such strict and rigid terms that precluded a sense of possibility. But he wants to create something new that isn't defined as Reform and Conservative and Orthodox. So he's casting about for a name to put to what he calls a movement. He also calls it 56 other things along the way. And one of the things I do in the book is to catalog all the different names that he comes up for Reconstructionism. But it ain't a denomination. And he fights kicking and screaming throughout his life until towards the twilight of things. He has a change of heart, and he succumbs to the pressures of those within his own camp who argue that it's not going to take hold, that the forces of denominationalism are much too strong. The way that America understands religion and Jewishness is much too entrenched to be able to cast Reconstructionism, as he puts it, as a way of talking.
Right.
So he agrees for it to become a denomination. He quits the seminary. He donates his library to the emerging Reconstructionist Rabbinical College in Philadelphia, and he agrees very reluctantly, but I think for the sake of Shalom Bayit, for internal unity, to climb on board. But if he had his druthers, he would continue to sound the bell for a way of thinking. And in many ways, what he's anticipating is what we now call post-denominationalism. He didn't have that name, but that idea that you're not defined or restricted by denominational affiliation, but by your sensibilities, by your openness, by your sense of the plurality of Jewish expression.
But I think some of the most concrete expressions of this is his rewriting of the Haggadah and his rewriting of the prayer book.
Right.
Can you tell me remind us when that was, and maybe the Haggadah, since we're coming
right. So the Haggadah, he had, I don't know exactly when, but as early as 1924, he talks about fiddling. He doesn't use that word, that's mine, but tweaking, he doesn't use that word either, but somehow amending the
reconstructing Haggadah. Even
reconstructing. He doesn't use that word quite yet either. That's more of a 30s construct. He's constantly trying to figure out what word would do justice to his conceit, but he knows that the Haggadah has to be recalibrated. And as early as the 20s, he talks of the importance of putting the Haggadah on the same level of importance as the Knedlach, as the matzah balls, right? So I think for a while, he has his own family version. He has a mimeographed version in which he plays with the text. He removes things that he thinks are not consonant with modern America, or that just way too heavy, like a matzah ball, on the consciousness of American Jews, and he adds lots of things. And that continues as a private thing for many, many years. And then he launches it within the private domain of SAJ, the congregation that he founded. And notice, he doesn't call it Anshe Kaplan or Anshe, I don't know,
right.
Brooklyn. He calls it the Society for the Advancement of Judaism. So with that lumbering title, as well as with the equally lumbering title of Reconstructionism, he's signaling that, he's trying something new. So little by little, he I guess people are telling him it would be nice if members of other communities would have access to the Haggadah. So in 1941, it makes its debut, published by Berman House, and it's called, again, very forthrightly, very declaration-y, the New Haggadah. And what you have to bear in mind is that in 1941, unlike today, where everyone and his cousin has a version of the Haggadah that reflects their own particular constituency, audience, interest, attention span, there were only two other Haggadot in circulation at the time. One was the Maxwell House Haggadah, and the other was Mrs. Cowan's Haggadah. Both are, excuse me, both were very, very traditional. So Kaplan's comes along like an earthquake because it was so unheard of. And he sticks by his guns, and he removes a lot of things that most of us consider sacred cows, like the 10 plagues. He truncates Dayenu. He takes out notions of chosenness, all of which he thinks interfere with a modern American Jew's apprehension of the meaning of Pesach. And he elevates the centrality of freedom, and he puts Moses into the narrative. And as you know, Moses is conspicuously absent from the traditional text. So he has a field day. He puts in a lot more music. He puts in illustrations. He tries to make it modern and consonant and appealing to people for whom the Seder is more of an exercise in eating than it is in contemplation. So that's in 41. And then a couple of years later, all the while he's been thinking about doing the same thing for the Shabbat morning Siddur prayer book, because he looks out at his own congregation, and he travels a fair amount, and he looks out at other congregations, and he finds a lot of bored congregants, and seats are kind of sparse. And he realizes that in order to make sure that the Shabbat morning service does not disappear and go the way of so many other things, that it needs, and by now he would say, reconstruction. So after a lot of committee work and a lot of rethinking, he issues his own Siddur in 1945, which is far bigger than the traditional Siddur, far heftier, with a lot of different options and different ways of thinking about prayer and liturgy. It's designed for those who no longer know how to daven or pray, and it's designed to be a kind of script, as his second in command and son-in-law and co-editor, Rabbi Ira Eisenstein, the first president of the Reconstructionist movement and the fellow who consistently was pushing for the idea that Reconstructionism should be a denomination like all the others, calls it a script. And I think that's really apt. It's a script with options, ways to go in and go out. And as I bet you're about to ask me, how does this play? He gets in a lot of hot water. And it does puzzle me why he gets into such hot water. You know, I spent a lot of time in his company and in the company of American Jews of that era. And I really have a hard time understanding why they saw it as such a threat. For Kaplan, doubt and questioning were tools. They weren't threats. But for so many people in the community, then as now, I guess, questioning open-endedness, thinking about authority in a different kind of way, all of those things were not deemed healthy, but were seen as subversive. So I think that was going on. So the Haggadah, he gets in a lot of hot water from his colleagues. The Siddur, he gets in a lot of hot water from the very increasingly growing right-wing community, the Haredi community of New York, and he's placed in cherem, in excommunication. I believe he is the only American rabbi to weather that experience, and it flattened him. For a spell, it just hollowed him out. But he's a strong person, and he believes in the integrity and the legitimacy and the urgency of what he has to offer. And after a while, he gets back on the horse. And he lives a lot more years and continues to fight what he considers to be the good fight, which is to forestall the disappearance of American Jewishness, to ensure its survival, and to make sure that it's full of life. and laughter and intellection and possibility.
So, I mean, in addition to Jewish Center, SAJ, he's at the Jewish Theological Seminary for 50 years.
Do you imagine?
And
No.
I mean, that's the first thing I can imagine. And then why both would keep each other. I mean, the seminary isn't very happy with the prayer book, right?
No.
Why did he stick, and why did they stick with him?
I don't know. It's such a great question. I suspect to some extent it's a matter of the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. I also feel, or have come to understand that he feels the seminary is as much his and as much of a laboratory for thinking through new ideas of Jewishness as the other activities of his colleagues. It was also very defeating for him to be in an environment where, as he puts it, he feels shelved. I mean, as a colleague, as an academic, to feel shelved by your colleagues is really a toxic feeling. But he perseveres because inwardly he believes that he has more to offer the students than his colleagues, or he has as much to offer his students as his colleagues. He believes in the environment of academic freedom and of the need to create an American rabbinate. And where else is he going to go? There was a spell where he actively contemplated going over to what was then the newly established Jewish Institute of Religion, which was formed by Rabbi Weiss, but even its espousal of pluralism veered too close to reform, and he wasn't comfortable with that. But from time to time, he does toy with the idea of joining up with Stephen Wise, and as he puts it in his beautiful diary, of crossing the Rubicon, of making that big step. But then something always...
Wise, the major figure in Reform Judaism.
In Reform Judaism and in American Zionism, very controversial figure. So these two powerful people would inhabit the same academic roof and offer a new version of Jewishness, but something stays his hand. And sometimes it's the acclamation of his students, don't go, please. And sometimes it's the acclamation of the Rabbinical Assembly. And at other moments, it's just inertia, or I'll show you, kind of stick-to-itness. When the Haggadah comes out and is received with such acrimony, he does give thought of checking out and going over to JIR. And I imagine he has a sense of hanging up his shingle when the to-do over the Siddur breaks. But remarkably, he stays the course. A lesser person would say, you know what, American Jews, you're on your own. See ya. But he doesn't do that. And that's truly to his credit, even as he continues to experience all manner of slings and arrows for the rest of his life. So he's quite a remarkable person, and belief in the Jewish people, even though they exasperate him no end, belief in the eternality of Jewishness, even though it changes its stripes repeatedly over time. All of these things sustain him, and Israel too. Israel exasperates him no end, and he does feel like a duck out of water in Israel, but he stays the course there too.
I want to talk about Zionism in a few minutes, but first I want to talk about Judaism as a Civilization, which is his best known book, and maybe the best known, 4 words that he contributed to the Jewish vocabulary. So let's just try to unpack what that means. When we say Judaism as a civilization, maybe I'll ask it this way: as opposed to what? What's a reaction?
A religion.
As a religion. Okay.
Right.
Let's unpack that a little. What is a civilization in this sense?
It means the totality of Jewishness. I just wrote a piece in the foreword where I argued that a really good word for civilization is Yiddishkeit. But that was not a word. What is Yiddishkeit? It's a sensibility. It's a constellation of things. It's a sensibility. It's ritual practices. It's humor. It's food ways. It's the jokes. It's the totality of what it means to be Jewish. It's not just something that happens on Shabbat morning, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. But he He was no big fan of Yiddish. He thought it just got in the way, and it was too old worldly for his taste. He was fluent in Yiddish and spoke a mean Yiddish, but it was not a language that Hebrew was his language, and English. So he himself did not feel comfortable, although I think he's infused by a notion of Yiddishkeit as the way to proceed. What else? Ethnicity is really another omnibus term that speaks to this, but that didn't come into play until the 70s. Civilization seems mighty and strong and capacious, a big tent into which to house all of these things. And so civilization it is. A number of my colleagues have explored who else was thinking in civilizational terms at the time. There were quite a number of people. American civilization, the whole idea of American civ as an academic enterprise is really coming into its own. But for him, it's a buzzword by which to encompass the totality of Jewishness. And he felt that to limit it to a religion is to rob it of its essence. He even says something so beautifully lyrical somewhere along the lines about how to think of Jewishness, Judaism, as just a religion is to encounter a rose in a vase, as opposed to encountering the rose as a rose bush. You kind of lose the essence, the organicness of it. So I think that's what he was trying to do. And he also argued along the way that the civilization was so broad that it also embraced American values of democracy and pluralism and the importance of the common folk. And so for him, it's a word that says, come on in, this is a big tent. And it's a way for American Jews to regain their sense of pride, to realize that being Jewish, as he says in his first sentence, the book is over 500 pages, and it's very, what shall we say, lumbering. Yeah. Did you ever read it or read parts of it? I tried. Yeah, I read it in graduate school, which is an appropriate place. It's a very tough read. It's not bedside reading, although it was very popular. Or people, let's do it this way. People probably owned a copy. I don't know that they actually read it, but they know the first sentence, and I'm going to mangle it, but it's something along the lines of, throughout most of Jewish history, or all of Jewish history, Jews regarded being Jewish as a gift, as a privilege. But ever since the 19th century, the Jews have regarded being Jewish as a burden. And so he's attempting single-handedly to subvert that by arguing that, no, Jewishness in the modern era shouldn't just be a burden, shouldn't just be the consequence of anti-Semitism or exclusion, but it should be something that Jews, they claim to proudly, knowledgeably, through the process of engagement. I would say, if I had to name what he was up to, he wants an intentional Jewishness, with all that we mean today by intention. I think that's what he was up to. But it's hard, Many of us think, and I've written about this in other contexts, so much of us relate to Judaism as a gestural bit of business. It's occasional, it's volitional, it touches our heart, but it doesn't engage us as continuously as Kaplan would like. And so he's attempting to redraw the landscape and to make Jewishness, even at a time of growing anti-Semitism in the 1930s, both here and abroad, Jewishness is something that's going to keep us aloft. Keep us going, and in a not just in a heartfelt way, but in an informed, vigorous, robust way. It's a tall order. It's a really tall order. It's a tall order 1930. It's a tall order now.
I see people are leaving questions in the Q&A. Thank you. So continue doing that. We'll get to them in a few minutes, but the place to drop your questions for Professor Joselit in the Q&A. We're talking about Judaism as civilization. The thing that it doesn't have, well, you write at one point that Kaplan, quote, banished discipline and obligation along with sin to the outskirts of his religious philosophy. And I guess the rap against, reformers like Kaplan is that without that sense of obligation, it's hard to keep the thing going. People have to believe they have to do this. And I wonder if that, and then I guess I was surprised, and maybe now's the time to talk about his family. I think he was disappointed that his children, 4 daughters, is that correct?
Yes.
he didn't see much of a Jewish life
Or enough, but
next
you have
generation.
to, take
Yeah,
that with 89 grains of salt because nobody did as much as he. Nobody was
yeah.
kept, awake at night. He was disappointed in everybody. That's just a characterological flaw. He does feel that they don't. He's up all the time. This is something that keeps him going all the time, and most people don't function with that level of intensity. He never let up, and so yes, he feels disappointed in his congregants. He's disappointed in his leadership. He's always disappointed. So I understand that. But yes, they're different people. They're growing up in a different time. The burdens, the weight on them, their emphasis is different, and he is very doctrinaire, I think, at times as to his expectations. But you're absolutely right that he renders discipline and conformity and obligation and responsibility to the margins. And he's hopeful, he's wrong, but he's hopeful that people will take on these things of their own, and one doesn't need a stick with which to beat them, that somehow communities will form organically through like-mindedness and through a shared belief in the same kind of things, and that they want to. He wants people to want to, not because grandma said, or you feel bad because you're not honoring what grandma said, or because your father will be disappointed in you, but because it speaks to you. It speaks to you. And if it speaks to you, you'll continue. But as you point out, Andy, there's a kind of fatal flaw. I'd really like to think that we don't do things just because we'll be punished if we didn't. But that's what he's up against. There's that old wonderful Yiddish expression about Machen Shabbos für sich. Everybody makes the Shabbat for themselves. What do you have? You have anomi. You don't have a strong sense of community. But he was willing to take that risk and to place volition rather than enforcement and discipline. But it remains a problem.
Right.
Yeah. Do you like him? May I ask you? You've been asking me all these good questions. May I ask you, what's your take of him and your sense? And has that changed as a result of reading the book? Are you more sympathetic to him?
So I remember a headline in Moment magazine years ago is Reconstructionism is the smallest denomination, but it's what everybody believes.
Yeah.
And I kind of believe that because it was kind of like there's that sense that, a sense that Judaism is volitional, as you said. And, the pleasure comes in. If the mitzvot work for you, then that's great. And Shabbat's a wonderful technology. And I'm that kind of Jew where, like, some people would call it pick and choose. But to me, it's like what really works about this wonderful civilization. So I'm very sympathetic to what he's after. But it's kind of like, a faux sociologist of Jewish life. I just see a little bit of he's doing a lot of this in vain because it's not sticky enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I see him frustrated that what he's putting forth is not creating Jewish communities in the way he wanted it to. So
Right.
that's my take. I think his analysis is terrific, but I just don't know if it's real to how people organize their religious
lives or cultural lives, yeah. And then ethnicity comes along, and that makes a hash out of this because you don't have to. Well, it's a whole other ballgame, right? A whole other way of being identified. But I think the vocabulary, the gestures, the institutions, the impetus, the urgency is so very powerful. I'm not a Reconstructionist, but I find his diagnosis of the problem, his acute sense of the tension between volition and obedience really is quite telling. And ultimately, I think in many ways, the book is as much a profile of American Jews of the 20th century as it is a biography of him, because you get a sense of how far they want to go, what they're willing to listen to, how much they valorize him, but when do they stop short? Who are our people? That's what he's continuously trying to identify. And the ups and downs, his successes, his stumbles speak a lot about us, much more at times than they do about him.
Great, thanks, and thanks for asking me. I was able to do a little therapy there. Thank you.
Do you like him? Do you like him?
Like him is a funny question because I don't know. I don't know if I like him. I think he's a little forbidding.
Yeah, a little.
I think he
Right.
doesn't suffer fools,
Right.
and I didn't really get a good sense of who. And this isn't your fault. It's who's his chevra? Does he have a community of, that on Shabbat
Right.
where they come together for lunches and dinners? There's a certain loneliness to his enterprise
Yes.
came through.
Yes. Yeah. That's
So
very well
that's not
said.
like or dislike. It's just I'm not sure I'd be friends with him because I don't know if he was a
Right.
person who valued
Yeah.
friendships like that.
Yeah, I think he did. I think he just didn't know. He was not one for small talk.
Hmm.
There's this wonderful passage in the diary where he lives in Jerusalem between 37 and 39. That's not often known about him. And his record, and more importantly, the letters that his wife Nina writes back to the family are just a gold mine. A first-hand account of what it was like to be in the Yishuv, living in Talbiah, this suburb of Jerusalem, during those very, very difficult times. And I just lost my train of thought. Where was I going with
We were asking about his friendship circles
his friendship? Yes, yes. So one of the things that sustains him as the politics of the situation and reality on the street get darker and darker is his friendship with Buber and Shalom and all those giants of the Jewish intellectual universe. What does he talk about with Buber when they're on the bus? They don't talk about the weather. They don't talk about politics. They talk about God. So his relationship to people is always so weighty, so heavy. And he finds in Israel and the Yishuv in Jerusalem that kind of companionship. And he has a couple of buddies here, but he needs to sustain that level of intellectual activity all the time. And that's not what goes on here.
Right.
On the other hand, he could be playful, he could be loving, he could even be sensual. He loved to eat, he loved food, he loved to take care of his body, he loved walking, he loved nature, all of those things. So there's another side to him that gets swallowed up in the intensity and I think the public grimness of his
Right.
posture. And I get asked a lot, like, what would I say to him if he and I had a chance to talk? I mean, one of those fictive kinds of encounters, and I'd say I wouldn't say a word. I'd be cowering in the corner. I'd be terrified of him because he glowered, and made it clear that he didn't suffer fools, but he yearned for us fools to be part and parcel of his experiment. I like him. I went in knowing how formidable he was, but spending so much time with him, reading what he wrote and rewrote and imagining the situation and struggling so much. I feel I'm very invested in him now and very protective of him. And I want to do right by him. And I hope that the book will afford a new generation of people who either knew him or knew of him or never heard of him before with a sense of what a remarkable, complicated, and should be heralded American Jew Mordecai Menachem was.
So I think now is a good time to turn to some audience questions, and one follows from what you just said about of Kaplan and Buber on the bus. What does he say about the need to believe in God? Is that a prerequisite for a Jew?
Yes, he
And I
does.
thought maybe one way to ask that is, I know we had a Pledge of Allegiance that he wrote, which I think was very, for Jewish children, which I think might go a long way to answering this question. But go ahead.
Yes, he does believe in God. It's not the God that figures in the traditional liturgy. It's not a supernatural God, and it's a God who is more of a humanist God. God is about process, he writes. God is about salvation. I still don't know what that means, but I know that it means not a supernatural God or a personal God. He does say to a number of JTS students at one point who say that they really have a hard time believing in God. Not to believe in God is like having the play of Hamlet without Hamlet. That God is absolutely indispensable. The rub is that the divine he presents is so woolly and hard to understand and so bound up with fancy theistic knowledge that the average Joe on the street, on the Jewish street, has a hard time understanding. And so, it all gave rise to these hilarious comments about how there is no God and Kaplan is his prophet, or Kaplan's idea of God was to whom it may concern. These are funny and humorous and on point, but mean-spirited, because he does grapple throughout his life in everything he does with the role of God. What he does do, and that which I think is clear, is he shifts the center of gravity of Jewish life away from trying to appease or speak to God, and centers it in the Jewish people. So he shifts the center of gravity so that we do all of these things to keep the Jewish people afloat, not to honor God. That's kind of a big change.
Sure.
But yeah, he's wrestling with God all the time. And there are quite a number of books in which one is more difficult to understand than the other. He gets really lost in the weeds, but he's trying very hard to come up with an understanding of God that is rational, that is modern, that is America, that can be embraced by people without sacrificing the degree of intelligence that they bring to other things. And sometimes he goes a little too far.
Right. I know you have a wonderful few pages on his relationship with Abraham Joshua Heschel. And so someone is asking, what was that relationship like, and was he inhibited by Heschel, another JTS faculty member of great renown, mid-20th century?
Right. Well, for one thing, he brought him onto the faculty, so he felt a real responsibility to him. But it became very, very clear that Heschel wasn't going to be his man and take up his way of thinking, that Heschel would march to his own beat. And increasingly, he becomes more and more threatened by Heschel. And the world changes. Heschel comes along at a time when the Holocaust is in full swing. Post-war American Jewry is a very, very different baby than American Jewish life before the war. And Kaplan predicated his entire scaffolding on America, not on the old world, and tended to diminish the old world, where Heschel's writings are suffused with an attempt to bring the old world, both as a form of memorialization and as a form of active behavior, back into circulation. So they were very much at odds. And as Heschel's star rises dramatically over time, gradually but dramatically, Kaplan's star fades. And like any of us, if you've been in the limelight and then you feel that the spotlight is now on someone else, you don't feel so good. And Kaplan is aging and seeing that his vision is no longer taking hold, and that both the students and the larger American Jewish public is much more responsive to what Heschel has to say. He becomes more embittered and saddened. Outwardly, they're cordial enough that they invite one another to one another's home for Shabbat afternoon tea. And I know that I found an invitation to Heschel's daughter's bat mitzvah, to which Kaplan appended a little note saying, yes, they'd be delighted to come. But inwardly, Kaplan takes to the diary to seethe and to rail. Do I have time for a story about this? Yes. So in 1968, when Heschel is really at the acme of his fame, the religion editor of Newsweek approaches Kaplan with the idea of doing a big feature piece on what constitutes prayer in modern America. How should we understand liturgy? And he asks a raft of clergymen, not just Kaplan and obviously Heschel. And Kaplan characteristically prepares a very detailed analysis, point 1, point 2, point 3, and it's just a Newsweek. It's not an but I think he overwhelms his interviewer, as I'm doing right now, with all the fine points of his analysis. End of story. He feels very happy that he's had the opportunity to set forth his theology of prayer. A couple of days, weeks maybe pass, and he gets wind of the fact that the issue of Newsweek is available on the newsstand. He doesn't have to wait for it to appear in the mail. And so he takes himself off to the newsstand on 86th Street in Central Park West and eagerly purchases 2 copies at 50 cents apiece. And he stands on the street, as we all do, thumbing through the pages of Newsweek to see where his contribution is, what they said, how the article made him seem. He keeps on thumbing, and he discovers, much to his dismay, that his name does not appear in the least. And not only does his name not appear, nothing of what he had to say in this very detailed analysis that he bestowed upon the Newsweek reporter is in evidence, and who takes the lead, who is hailed as the most intellectual, the most thoughtful, the key personality who's reckoned with Jewish prayer in America, Heschel. So one could only dimly imagine how Kaplan felt. He slinks off back home, and later that night he writes in his diary, "What a waste of $1." So it's just such a human response. I mean, he's so pained. What is he going to say? But this kind of sums it up, that by 68, he doesn't even get a mention in Newsweek magazine. There's something so sad about that. But he continues. He comes up with new ideas, a constitution for the Jewish people. He comes up with this Pledge of Allegiance for summer camp, Jewish summer campers. He comes up with the idea of a covenant. Hebrew University should be the fountainhead of a new covenant. There should be a new ceremony, like Brit Milah, like circumcision, that would bind the Jewish people. He's cooking. He continues to cook. But American Jews, in fact, global Jewry, has moved on, and his ideas remain more dormant than active.
And I think, if I remember from the Newsweek article, that contained one of Heschel's most famous quotes, which was, "When I marched to Selma, I was praying with my feet."
My feet.
Yeah.
Right. So for Kaplan, it's like, your feet? Your feet?
I thought he might like that one because, it's action and it's, okay.
Yeah, but he didn't say it. And he said, you pray with your head, you pray with your ideas, you pray with intentionality. Your feet? He just, it was too hurtful for him.
Right. Someone asked a question about Sedgwick camps.
I
also attended Sedgwick camps in the 1960s, and Kaplan was in residence for a time. He taught a weekly class for the leadership LTC in 1967. Do you write about the Sedgwick camps and
just a little he goes to camp every summer, pretty much every summer, even though by the 60s, his beloved first wife has died, and he, much to his surprise, remarries, and he marries this remarkably strong woman, an Israeli artist named Rivka Rieger, and so they divide their time increasingly in the summer between Sedgwick camps and Jerusalem, and it's a measure of his devotion, I guess. I don't know what the exact word is. His urgency, his sense of mission, that he spends much of his summer among younger people in summer camp, trying to infuse them with new notions of leadership. What's funny is that he never relaxes sufficiently to look like a camper or to partake in camping experiences. But I've heard a lot of formidable and formative stories about this great man being in a bunk in Sedgwick camp. And again, it speaks to his looking constantly for new audiences, new ways, and the glories of teaching. In so many different settings. He loved to talk, and talk for him was spiritual. And so he finds it wherever he can, at JTS in the winter and Sedgwick camps. And Sedgwick, I think, in many ways provided American Jews with their access to what would become Reconstructionism. It was pluralistic. It wasn't coercive. It wasn't disciplinary. It was more joyousness, the fullness, the fun of being Jewish.
Someone asked, can you share a little about Kaplan's take on Zionism?
Yeah.
In some form, does his version of Zionism is it still with us?
Oh, wonderful questions. Kaplan was very active in the Zionist movement from the get-go, and periodically in his early years would think of giving up the ghost in America. He's gone as far as he could go. Time to stop talking about Zionism and actually make good on it. But then he'd get cold feet. But then he'd be back and forth. He'd be at a board meeting, bored to tears with the nonsense of the board meeting, and say in his diary, "I wish I could take the next boat and go to Palestine." And he does from 37 to 39, and is constantly making a case for the centrality of Zionism, more as a cultural force, more as a way of infusing Jewishness with a a zeal and an energy, and does not quite think of the potential of a state. It's just beyond his way of thinking. And also nationalism at the time is increasingly held in bad order. What's the expression? Bad odor, right? Bad odor. So he's thinking of other ways of highlighting the notion of Jews as a people. And then increasingly, as Israel becomes a state and it gets entrapped in issues of sovereignty and the role of the Rabbanut as foreclosing any other form of religious expression other than orthodoxy, he sours on it, all the while trying to agitate for a Zionism that's more pluralistic. In 1955, he writes a remarkable book called The New Zionism, in which he says something along the lines of, we work very hard the people of Zion worked really hard to build a new Zion, or Zion. Now it's time for Zion to build a new Jewish people. And so that becomes another mission for him late in life, to beat the drum for a Zionism that was pluralistic, that was as much cultural as it was political. And he didn't like what was happening on the ground in terms of statecraft. He didn't like what was happening in terms of the Arab refugee crisis, to which he was very attuned. You read this 1955 book that then appears again in 1959, and you have to marvel at how prescient it is. So in answer to the audience member's very acute question, you read that text, and if you didn't know the date, you would think that it's still very current. So like all of us, he's grappling with the enormity of the challenge, with the possibilities, but also being mindful of some of the limitations and how we should attempt to do better.
Mm-hmm. And someone you mentioned, his first wife, Lena.
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 Yes.
And I think tell us a little about her, because I think she kind of exemplifies the old saw that behind every great man is a
For sure, both of
very
them
busy
do.
woman.
Both of them. She was an American, one of 9 children. All of her siblings became quite successful and ultimately backed Kaplan in every which way. She was the epitome of an Upper West Side woman of the 1920s and 30s, very cultured, musical, very supportive of him. She kept him afloat. Not only did she keep Kaplan afloat, but she was the face of the congregation. You know, is only a really most adroit, socially adroit and sensitive rabbi's wife can be. And so I think she softened his edges. She made him aware of social obligations. She also just kept him afloat physically and in every which way, to the point that when she passed away, he was completely at sea, as so many men are. He didn't have to do anything. She did everything for him. And he writes in the diary of just how acutely lonely he was, how he missed her, how he's just tried really hard to be busy. And the more busy he was, he wouldn't have to think of her. But in between the busyness, she'd just come back in his mind. So he had no intention of remarrying, but he meets this woman and he falls in love. He more than she, but ultimately she comes round, and they lead a very exciting life, shuttling between New York and Jerusalem. And she keeps him afloat in Jerusalem. She was very well connected, and they led quite an active social life. She was very sensitive to his needs, and I think it's she, and her name is Rivka Rieger, who was so mindful of the fact that Kaplan had been enormously well attended to in New York, very, very busy all the time, and that here nobody really knew who he was, and that he was pining for students and pining for company. And so it's she who makes of their home on Ibn Ezra Street in the heart of Rehavia a pilgrimage site. She welcomes congregants, and she welcomes American Jews who are very prominent. And above all, she welcomes the increasing number of students who are now going to Israel for a gap year or in rabbinical school. So their home becomes the open house. And that sustains Kaplan a lot. They're not Talmidim or Talmidim in quite the same way, but he's still part of a larger environment, as opposed to that which happens to so many elderly people who become increasingly more reclusive and recessive. So she keeps him going. And he acknowledges that increasingly the body over which he had historically had such tight control begins to diminish. He begins to become much more querulous. Living in Jerusalem when your legs don't work is inordinately difficult, but she just manages to keep him in the thick of things and take really wonderful care until it becomes much too difficult for him and for her. And so they relocate here to the Hebrew Home for the Aged, where he will spend the balance of his time. After he passes, she returns to Jerusalem and ultimately dies in Jerusalem. So he's blessed with these remarkable women in his life and his daughters. He has four very attentive, very strong-willed, very lively daughters who also were just wonderful daughters to him and kept him going and in the thick of things. And some of the material that I have takes the form of his correspondence. His handwriting was more spidery, it's hard to see, and he's using those aerograms that we don't use anymore. And he covers every single surface of the aerograms, but it's full of ideas and possibilities, and they keep up the correspondence. And even though there's a point where they could use the phone, he much prefers this form of communication because he could give it full voice. And they're attentive. They're really attentive. They have their own busy lives here, but they're really attentive. So Kaplan was really, really lucky in the women who kept him afloat.
Great. So this hour has flown by, and I could keep going for another hour, but maybe this will have to, I think, be the last question, which is, he lives a long life. Towards the end of his life, he lived to see the Reconstructionist idea become a movement. What was he satisfied with at the end of his life, and what was maybe his biggest disappointment when in the end of days?
Well, I think it brings us back to where we started. That this is not how he envisioned things, but reality has a way of playing games, and ultimately he had to. I think succumb is the good word to this new reality, and it never sat comfortably. He made his peace with it, but it never sat comfortably. And he writes in the diary, I was expecting to see some kind of grand salutary message, some kind of valedictory, like the equivalent of a last will and testament. And there's none of that. It just kind of ebbs and floats away. Although at one point he quotes Solomon Schechter, who was a beloved teacher, the president of JTS when he was there. He quotes Solomon Schechter, and I think he's echoing the comment for himself, read me, read me. And it sounds almost like a plea, read me. And that's how I understand it, that's his legacy, that he wants to be remembered and read and grappled with and not shelved anymore. It's in a way what I hope to do with this book, to make people go back to the sources and to read him and to reckon with the enormity of that which he bequeathed all of us, even if we don't acknowledge it formally as Reconstruction.
Well, it is a terrific read. There's a link in the chat if you want to get the book. And I hope it finds the audience it deserves, because he's a fascinating person, and you do him justice in a way that it's not a heavy tome about ideas. It's about how he lived and worked and loved, and so I commend you on that. So I want to thank before we say goodbye, I just want to thank our partners here at UJA-Federation, New York Jewish Week, my colleagues at the Jewish Week, Beryl Bessemer and Thea Weiselt here. But most of all, Jenna, thank you for really a fast and fascinating hour and a terrific book.
Thank you for those wonderful questions and for helping me bring Kaplan back into circulation, if only for an hour on a Tuesday night.
Terrific. Thank you all for taking part, and we'll see you at our next Folio event.